Okay, wonderful. So we are live. Uh, so let's start. So good morning, warm welcome to everyone for the 85th episode at Giriz Adda. I really can't believe that we've done 85 episodes of books, songs, and of course some very interesting conversations. In the meanwhile, a big thanks to all of you who have been with me on this little journey, who have supported me, who've kept asking me for more. Okay, so I've come back here today with a wonderful, a very special guest on our show, and with Geeta Ramanujam. That's her name, and you can see her there in all her splendor. uh, uh, with Geeta, I will be getting back to more conversations on the Adda. In fact, for Geeta's information, also we had stopped the conversations part of the Adda for some time. I'm really happy to be back there. And for those of you who are viewing this show, Giriz Adda is all about books, songs, and conversations, in the hope that we contribute to a better world. Okay, so without any further ado, let me start. Introducing you to Geeta, and that is not going to be a very easy task because she's an embarrassment of riches. Okay, but then some adjectives, some terms, some words come to my mind. First of all, first and foremost, and I think this is a name that I have given her. She's an eternal storyteller. Many people call her a master storyteller. That's their choice. For me, she's an eternal storyteller because ever since I've known Geeta, which is like a good 30 years now, she's been telling stories. Whether she's in school or whether she's in the bus or she's in the marketplace or she's sitting next to you, you hear fascinating stories from Geeta. And so, therefore, she's an eternal storyteller for me. But apart from that, and I think this will become clearer as we go along, Geeta is an entrepreneur who has very successfully created storytelling as uh, as an organization, as a structure that is needed in society, that we all need very desperately. How did she manage to do that? It's not easy. It's easier said than done. We will get to know about it from her. The other word that comes to my mind is she's an audacious dreamer, because you need to dream big. You need to dream big to convert all those thoughts into reality. And lastly, I must say, she's also an institution builder. And some of these, references or statements will become clear when Geeta herself starts talking about her journey. And it wouldn't be off the mark to say that Geeta is a pioneer in the movement of storytelling in India. She's contributed significantly both in India, Asia, and across the world. Some more, stuff which will help you understand Geeta better. So Geeta is the founder of an amazing institution called as the International Academy of Storytelling, which is, by the way, the only academy of its kind in the world. And that's an amazing feat by itself. Little did I imagine, I've been in education for 30 years, little did I imagine that we would have an organization dedicated to education, an international academy for storytelling, sorry, which would popularize storytelling across the globe. Um, she has trained more than 1 lakh adults. So more than 1 lakh adults have passed through the portals of the International Academy of Storytelling, Kathalaya, in fact, as it was called when it began, and more than 5 lakh children, including my daughter. So they've undergone very, very interesting and enjoyable workshops at the International Academy of Storytelling, which is based in Bangalore. Uh, for more than 25 years, I think now, Geeta has been occupied with storytelling. She lives, breathes storytelling. She's not only done it in India, she's visited about 50 countries, perhaps more. I don't know what the last count is, Geeta. So, and in those 50 countries, you can imagine she has taken part in storytelling festivals, and she's interacted with educators and people from within government. She's had fun basically traveling the globe and telling her stories. Yeah. Um, the interesting thing from all these journeys is she's picked up many stories while she has told as many stories. And I'm going to come later to the stories that she's picked up, because we are also going to be talking about this wonderful book that Geeta has written, and it was published recently by Penguin Puffin in 2022. We'll talk about that as we go along. Uh, so, what are the accolades that Geeta has got? I want to kind of stop there. Uh, and you need to tell me whether I'm pronouncing this right. I found this very difficult. In fact, I had to check out this pronunciation, the Boca da Fiu, which is a Brazilian award, all the way on the other side of the globe, a Brazilian award for the best story narrator, which she received in Brazil. And back home in Tamil Nadu, the governor of Tamil Nadu also gave her the best storyteller or the story narrator award. She's been an Ashoka Fellow. In fact, being an Ashoka Fellow, I think, was a big turning point in terms of the work that Geeta has done to establish an academy for storytelling. She'll tell us more. Uh, in 2005, something very interesting happened. So, Geeta was instrumental in organizing the first ever storytelling festival in India, which entered the Limca Book of Records, because there were thousands of people more than 7,000 people, in fact, who attended that storytelling festival. And she's, of course, taken part in many such festivals across the globe. And last but not the least, I'm taking too much time because the show is all about Geeta. She's been a very dear friend. And the story behind this 85th episode began one autumn morning in 1993 in the very beautiful Valley School in Bangalore, where I met Geeta and she was teaching there. Okay, so Geeta, I hope I have done justice to you as a person. Um, uh, so let me begin, I think, with the most obvious question that people would want to know. How did it all begin? I mean, how did you at what point did you decide to become a storyteller? In fact, the stuff that I've read about you on the web, and even in this book, uh, Tales from the World, talks about you becoming a storyteller in 1996. But I suspect that it was much before that you were a storyteller. So tell us a little about that journey. And welcome again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Giri. It's such a pleasure to be here on your show. And more than anything else, that autumn morning that you talked about, I think it was the first connection that we had. And I still remember that you had a passion for teaching.
Hmm.
And I think children were gaga over you because of uh, the way maths. I always, the first thing that when I listen to you in the school is, I wish I had a maths teacher like you, because I think you were one of the few. I haven't seen anyone else make math so interesting as you had. And I still remember you tried new ways of making it interesting. You were always interested in exploring new areas of education.
Right.
And one very distinct memory is of, I remember I had chosen civilizations in the fifth grade to teach children about the Egyptian and the Chinese civilizations
Hmm.
and all that. And that was again new because I think I was fascinated by the Mayan, Aztec, and all that. And I
Right.
remember you saying, can I also do something with as an extension of your class? And I remember you teaching the pyramids and the dimensions of the pyramids after I did about Egypt. And I still remember a lot of things that you took away and tried to merge social science and math. And that's something I'll never forget because
Lovely.
nobody has tried to do it after that. So I think
Right.
it is this innovative mind. Rather than today, people just documenting and telling, let's put it on paper, everything on paper, right on paper. I
Right.
think the thinking aloud is not happening. And so I'm so glad to be on this show after all these years, Giri. And I know that you're doing
The pleasure's
wonderful.
ours entirely.
Yes, I think it's a mutual admiration because I think you've done a great job even at UNICEF as
Thank you.
an
Thank you
educational
so much.
officer. And
Thank you
I'm
so much.
so glad to be here on your show.
Yeah.
So, okay, maybe
So Prithvi says hi to
stories.
you. I think Prithvi Banwasi, you might be knowing him.
Yes,
He said
yes,
hi.
hi, hi,
And I'm sure there are many
hi.
other people who will pop in as we go along. Yeah,
Yeah,
Geeta.
sure, sure. Yeah, so many people have heard about how I became a storyteller, but maybe I should add something new to this whole dimension today. Is that I was very happy. I was a very happy-go-lucky girl. I still am, and I think the gene is very important. The
Mhm.
DNA and the DNA of happiness is
Yeah.
also part of something that you kind of get from your ancestors. And I remember my grandmother was a very jovial person. So
Okay.
she was a widowed at a very young age. She
Hmm.
was carrying the fifth child in
Okay.
her womb when she lost her husband, which is my grandfather.
Hmm.
And the wit and humor that she had was unparalleled. And
Wow.
I still remember she went to a school. I think she sat down on the last bench to learn English after all those years. And
Okay.
she would love to read the newspapers. And she was a great politician because I think she always whenever I visited her, she would say, "Do you know about Jacqueline Kennedy? You know she's now married Onassis. I think it's a good decision that she made." And I would be shocked. I said, "From where is she getting all these stories?" Right? So
Yeah.
I think she had this thing of telling a story just by, and she had a, I think she had a fantastic memory. But
Right.
unfortunately, I didn't have too many interactions with my grandmother. But though she
But
was
you got
caught up
that.
with the,
You got that
yeah,
feeder from there.
yeah,
Okay.
I think so. So,
Hmm.
and she would always joke and she would sing a song, and I think she was this happy-go-lucky person. And
Hmm.
I think a little bit of that. My aunt, who just recently passed away, she never married. I know my mother used to tell me the stories about her,
Hmm.
where she was forced to marry, I think, my uncle, because what happened is my grandmother didn't want the money, the property to go away from the family. So
Okay.
she put her in a room and said, "Tomorrow I'm getting you married to the uncle." And I don't know, she's a thin person, but those iron bars in the windows, they were not
Right.
very, I think they were not very strong. And
Strong.
she had actually,
Price them apart.
bent it. Yeah, put two things apart and she had escaped. She actually
Wow.
jumped out of the window, and this was from a place called Tirunelveli. You won't
Right.
believe she had just finished a PUC, and she knew, I think, typing and shorthand. And she
Huh.
ran away. She took a bus and came to Chennai. And
Okay.
she goes and tells the person in one of the hostels, a women's hostel, that, "Listen, give me place. I swear I can promise I can earn money and give it back to you, but just give me a loan for 3 months to stay in this hostel before I
Right.
find a job." Just imagine the kind of courage, and these stories like
Absolutely.
was
Absolutely.
fascinating.
Hats
I mean,
off.
so I know. And then she goes and she finds a job. She typing shorthand, and she won the president's award later on for the
Oh,
LIC policies. She became a agent, and she
right.
was the top agent. And she lived alone, and she never married till the end. So
Hmm.
I'm just thinking, what are these activists and people raising flags today and saying, "I don't like that, I don't like this, and I am the woman is equal." I mean, these people didn't talk; they just did.
Right. They
And
just, yeah.
they just did, they just acted. And I think if it was my widowed grandmother or my aunt, I think they were great examples of how a woman should be, and
Mm.
how the main thing I learned is no fear. So
Right.
I think that gene a little bit came into me, and I was this absolutely fearless person. So I remember even when I was frightened of listening to ghost stories and other
Hmm.
things. But my mother told me a lot of stories in Tamil because
Okay.
it was in Bombay that I was born and brought up. And so lot of things, she would have this age old way from the traditional village types where they always use a proverb. So one proverb she would tell, and then I'll ask her, "What is that? I mean, what is that proverb?" And she would tell me the whole
Okay.
story.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's how very proverbial. And she'd say, your grandmother would often say, "Kupre vizhndalum meeshela mannu ottala," which means
Okay.
even if you fall upside down, that ego, it says, "Oh,
Oh,
nothing
okay.
stuck to
Wow.
my mush." So all these things I learned from my mother. My
But then you
father,
are
of
very
course,
proverbial too, Geeta. I think you slip into
no.
proverbs almost at every opportunity.
All that glitters is not gold. Huh?
No, no, no. As long as it touches the mush somewhere, I think it makes it done.
So that's how,
Yeah.
like, and then dad, of course, he was highly philosophical, and I learned something beautiful from him. You pinch him, you do anything, you shout, you scream, the face doesn't change. He's just
Mm,
listening to you, and
mm.
he's not at all reactive, and
Okay.
he's able to do what he had set out to do, and there's absolutely calm composure of his
Mm, mm.
throughout. In fact, he also maintained the same weight till he died. He was
Oh,
55 kgs,
oh, that's
and this
amazing.
was amazing. So I always remember my father just by the way slipping into a story, and
Oh,
he
okay.
would tell all the stories in English,
Okay.
and a lot of stories I still remember about sailing, about
Mm,
explorations,
mm,
and
mm.
then a lot of stories about the Jews and in the gas chambers. And
Okay.
the main thing that led, I think, which I followed later on in school, was he would tell a story, and then
Mm.
it would be late, we would go to sleep, and I'd say, "So what happened to those Jews?" And he'd say, "Why don't you read this book? It's beautiful." And any
Ah,
holiday, any book fair, we would be thrust with books. Imagine
okay.
a little girl who's not, no, today, no child wants to take classics first. But I was
Right.
very fond of classics, and I
Classics.
owe it to my father. Because
Wonderful.
everything, he would talk about the Second World War, and he'd buy us books like The Scarlet Pimpernel, Tale of Two Cities,
Right.
all that. Though they were
Right.
abridged versions, I think they made a
Yeah.
lot of difference. So,
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely wonderful. I think, and for me, it's new. Probably you haven't shared this journey all the way
yeah,
back to your childhood, to the days, and it helps me to recollect what I also experienced with my grandmother. I mean, we had this
right.
culture where in our family there was a huge love for Tamil because we had
Mm,
come from, I think,
Southern,
Tanjavur to
right.
Bangalore more than 120, 130 years ago, according to my
Okay,
grandmother at that time.
true.
And so she had this book on Vikramaditya, which was written in Tamil.
Mm,
She would
mm.
read it in Tamil and explain it to me in Marathi. And I would wait patiently as she read the next few lines and explained it to me in Marathi, and it was fascinating. I mean, her renditions of Mahabharata, Ramayana, and Vikramaditya and Shalivahana, and all of that. I mean, it's fascinating. But then, let me, just for the sake of friends who have joined over here, I want to share two endearing images that I have of Geeta, which also go back to the period when we were both colleagues at this school called as the Valley School. So when I joined the Valley School in 1993, Geeta was looking after the library. But before that, she also had a very long stint as a teacher in the Valley School. Uh, at that point in time, she had decided to move into the library and kind of get children excited about books. So whenever I popped into the library, I would always see Geeta surrounded by children, and I am not sure how many librarians would have that kind of a privilege. And when you went closer and saw what was happening, she would say, "Hey, why don't you pick this up, man? Why don't you read this book? It is so nice." And the child would ask, "What is there in this?" And she would slip into a little story. And I think that probably comes from your dad. As you said, I'm able to see
Yeah,
some sort of a connect there.
exactly.
And the other delightful memory that I have is Geeta in the school bus. So the Valley School was about 20
Yeah,
kilometers away from the city of Bangalore, the main part of the city. And so we had a good enough travel time. I think some children probably sat in that bus for more than an hour. And Geeta and I were not on the same bus. We were on different buses. But I think on one occasion when I did manage to get into her bus because I had to probably go to another place, I saw children climbing all over her. I mean, she would sit in whichever designated chair seat she had, and there was a child on her lap. There was a child pulling her hair. There was a child, standing behind her. I mean, there were people around her, whatever. And she had this great knack of making up stories. I think that's something that
Yes.
again, you have picked up from your grandmother, your aunt, your father, and so on. So
Yeah.
they would, you should see the expressions, on their faces when they heard about it. So thank you very much for that wonderful, tidbit about how it all began.
Began. Yeah.
But then, the interesting thing is, sorry, I don't know why. So the interesting thing is, um, at some point you moved out of the valley school, right? You
Yeah.
moved out,
Yeah.
uh, and then you
So I think
established.
that was when I think one of these sessions, which I've told very often, is when I was telling a story that one of them said, you know, you remember Girish Karnad? He would always come to the library first,
Yeah.
and there was another person who had accompanied him, and they were eavesdropping. And she said, "Why don't we have a workshop in the city?" And that's how it all began. So that
uh,
sure. Is
which year
when
was
I
that?
had
Do you
that
remember?
was, I think, 1996.
96.
1996, and so and then she asked for a workshop, and then there was another person called Geeta Sridhar,
Hmm.
who was in charge of Montessori materials. She kind of heard about me, and
Okay.
she passed on my information to two people.
Okay.
One was the Mahatma Montessori School principal called Premalata, and one
Hmm.
was to another person called Lata Shadagopan. I
Hmm.
think both of them decided one will have the workshop in the city, and the other person said, "You're going to come and train my 300 teachers in the art of storytelling." And
Okay.
because one article came in the newspaper, a small column, and that's how this entire thing, you don't know. That's another story, I would say, because you don't set out with I want to become this. Like,
Hmm.
I think most corporate, I mean, everything says, what is your goal first, and then you
Hmm. Hmm.
work towards that
Yeah,
goal.
where do
So
you want to be in 5 years, 10 years?
yeah, exactly. Oh my God. And what do you want? And exactly how you going to
Yes.
trace your steps, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's all on paper. I think nothing happens actually. So
Correct.
anyway, so I think this was much better because I've often seen a lot of, that's another thing, this Kela Valley and others when I was young in Bombay. I would see this Kela Valley actually feeding a baby, okay,
Okay.
selling the bananas, and
Bananas.
there was no phone at that time, and she would be talking to her husband or her brothers, and she would
Right.
be giving them instructions from which mandi, where you will get all in Marathi,
Right. Right.
and not a
Ah,
flaw in her speech.
right.
Who's taught them voice modulations? And
Yeah.
today, of course, the people who are, I would love to, with all the talk, right? So I just
Right.
think sometimes things are so natural. And I remember I was a good observer. I said, how did she manage?
Yeah.
One child would be running up and down. She would have that because it was Sion, the main road, right? And she has to see that he doesn't cross the road. So her eyes
Right.
were at the back too. And
Yeah.
then she would doing multiple tasks, and she would perfect, and she would
Hmm.
not compromise. But it's
Hmm.
5 paisa in those days, of course, 5 paisa, 10 paisa, ek kela. She said, no. You put me
Hmm.
down there. And she would count. So there was maths, there was communication, there was
Multiple stuff. Yeah.
whatever. You can now analyze the whole thing. But then
Hmm.
I thought all this was, again, for the fearlessness. I think that the ultimate thing is she was not afraid. She had to do her job, right? So that's one thing I also felt, because I also needed this job.
But
Um,
I see this, in written all over the work that you've done, this aspect of fearlessness,
yes,
audacity, actually,
right.
what I'm reminded of is that wonderful book by Obama, The Audacity of Hope. So
Yeah.
I think somewhere, so when you left the Valley School, it was with this idea of doing something around storytelling. Katalaya had not yet crystallized at that
No,
time.
No,
96.
not
Okay.
yet.
But then
Not
you were moving
only.
towards that.
I was moving towards that, yeah, because
And you were
uh,
looking for openings and opportunities where
yeah,
you could,
yeah.
establish
So,
yourself.
yeah,
Mm.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But like even today, it's not a very paying job.
Mm.
So at that time, one of the reasons was also, Giri, uh, I wanted more money. I wanted
Right.
income. And I saw this as a very good because I'll tell you
Mm.
also why.
Mm. Mm.
Because just when I began a little bit down the road,
Mm.
there was the India Foundation for Arts, and
Okay. IFA.
this
Mm.
IFA, who
Mm.
said, "Why don't you write a proposal to us?" And
Ah.
I didn't even know what is it to write a proposal. Okay,
Now
we
you're a
all
past
like.
master, I'm sure.
So carrying bags, putting pictures, I don't know what. And that journey was terrible because 6 times, from Valley School taking leave and going all the way till RMB extension. And there was a new program officer. I don't want to name her because now she's very popular.
Yeah.
She's a great author too, but she was I mean, she had to do her duty. She was the first program officer. So she was like needling me. And she said, this line is not okay. That line is not okay. And you won't believe in the end, after the 6 visits and writing the proposal again and again and again, I just told her, I don't want your funding. I don't want, yeah, I just said, forget it. I don't want to change anything anymore. I don't want your funding. And that's when the main person, who was Anmol Velani, came from inside the room and he said, so what's the problem? Because I was shouting. I was
Oh,
screaming. I
right.
lost my head and I said,
Right.
I don't want your funding. Okay.
Right.
And then he just said, why don't you just come to my room? So
Yeah.
I went to his room and he had a black whiteboard and there was this marker pen. He said me, tell me the 3 points that you want to do if we give you a fund.
Right.
And then I,
Okay.
so I said, I think I've done this so many times. So, okay, anyway, I'll tell you for the last time because I was very clear. I wanted to take
Yeah.
it to schools. I wanted storytelling to be part of education because
Hmm.
that's what, to make lessons interesting, which
Correct.
is what happened in Valley when. So
Absolutely.
he wrote that down and he said, go home. You've got the fund.
Oh, wow.
So
You
I'll
made it
never
that
forget this.
easy. But I'll tell
I
you
know.
something, having navigated funding spaces for decades, for many years now, I know what those frustrations can
I
be.
know. Oh
But
gosh.
he is a very important chapter in your life or
Yeah.
in the life of Kathalaya and
Yes.
everything wonderful that you've done.
Yeah.
What's his name, by the way?
Anmol Velani.
Anmol Venan. Okay. So I hope he gets to watch this sometime and I'm sure he would
Yeah,
put one
he knows
smile on
because
his
I called
face.
him for the 15 years celebration. And
Wonderful.
it was at the same time, when the stars shine, they say when it rains, it pours, isn't it? So it was at
Correct.
the same time that the Ashoka Fellow interviews happened.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
and then I also got the Ashoka
I think
Fellowship.
the other person I must remember. I mean, I had the privilege of knowing two Ashokans at that time. One was Dr. Gananath, who was
Yes,
math teacher in the valley, and we were all, of course, very close. Gananath has done some fascinating work. I hope to
fantastic work.
bring him into the Adda sometime. And
In fact,
it
he
was
was
delightful for
responsible
me to.
for recommending me. He
Oh
was
yeah, right.
responsible. Yeah,
That's how I think the fellowship
yeah,
spreads. Yeah.
yeah,
But tell me,
yeah.
Geeta, I mean, we also need to be a little mindful of time. What is that? I'm very fascinated to know what is that journey from Kathalaya Trust, which I have visited a couple of times in, in Bangalore. Uh, what is that journey from Kathalaya Trust to now this very
Mhm.
glamorous sounding International Academy of
Academy.
Storytelling, which is accredited to many institutions in the USA, Sweden, Scotland, and many other countries. So that's big. How did that happen?
Okay, so the
You'll
three
have to kind
main
of fast
points.
forward a bit so that but we need to know that journey.
Yeah, so just quickly, again, it's all a story.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know Alamelu, who was also with the Valley School with us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
She later joined me and then as a storyteller. And both of us decided to travel in 2003 because the IFA gave the fund only for 1 year. But after that, I still remember Ford Foundation came forward and they said they will fund me for all the rural schools to reach out on Kanakpura. So our
Wow.
initial journey was only reach out sessions. I never went much to urban places because I found absolute satisfaction in going all to these rural areas.
Right.
And I thought that was going to be my journey. But you know
Correct.
what happens, because you have been a thing, when the fund runs out, well, how
Yeah.
do you sustain? So one of the questions they always ask you is how do you sustain yourself? So
Yeah,
I
big
was
big
thinking,
word. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
everybody wants you to do something for two,
yes,
3 years, and they want you to
yes.
exist in eternity.
Exactly. And then how do I sustain? Now, this
Yeah.
became a big question. Now, if you want to sustain, then you cannot be all the time traveling to say one Chhattisgarh or,
Yeah.
thing to do your workshops. The Tata Trust also said they would fund us only if I traveled and I did the training for underprivileged in hilly areas, tribal areas, which I did.
Right.
But then what happens to the base? What happens to sustain myself? I began to
Yeah.
think. And
Yeah.
that's when I decided that why don't because by the time training became my main forte, I think
Mm.
people loved that I started training rather
Mm.
than just performing for children. Because
Mm.
children are always happy listening to a story.
Yeah.
But how do I change the mindset of the
That's
teachers?
the
How do I,
that's the
yeah,
critical
that's
point. Yeah.
exactly. So
Mm.
that's when Almelu joined, and there was another person called Manik Patwardhan.
Mm.
She was fantastic, and she said, Geeta, why don't we start an academy for storytelling? I said,
Mm.
I have this in my mind. This is my idea and everything. Well, the ideas came. It was put down on paper, and we said, yeah, but if we have to start a university or a thing here, who again government? I had no clue which
Yeah.
government person where to. So I said, okay, let it be as it is. And Almelu said, my nephew is getting married, and she had not traveled at all to
Mm-hmm.
abroad any time. And for me also, I had never traveled except when I just got married and I went in 77 to Vancouver, Canada for 2 years,
Right.
and I
Right.
returned. So I said, oh, that'd be great to travel to the US, but how do I get the money? So there was a
Right.
person from TRDC, a great man who said, if you do a project for me for 2 months, I will pay you at the rate of 2,500 a day. And I
Okay.
calculated that would be perfect for me to pay the airfare. What
Right.
Almelu said is, I'll take care of all your other stay. So
Correct.
that's how I went to US actually to attend a wedding. Now I
Okay.
knew there was an international storytelling center there,
Uh,
but
which
it
part
was
of the US was this?
extremely. This was Tennessee, so I went
Ten-
to New York first. I went to Washington because it's nice when in some Indians, especially the Iyer community, I think they have huge relationships. So she had her nephew, nieces, aunts, brothers, sisters all over the US.
Yeah.
So either they were studying or they had settled, and she said, "I'll take care of everything." So here, what happened is when we arrived in Washington, Library of Congress, both of us were voracious readers. We
Okay.
actually knocked into a person. Her name is
Okay.
Peggy Pulcher, and she's happened to be. This was literally an accident.
Wow.
An accident. She picks up the books and she says, "Who are you?" And we say, "We are storytellers from India." And she said, "Come into my cabin." And who is
Wow.
she? She's the head of the American Folklife Congress,
Wow.
the folklore. So
Amazing.
she said, "Oh, I'll write to Jimmy Neil Smith. I'm sure he would love to have you for the festival." And where is the festival? It's in Tennessee. I said, "No, it's very expensive. We can't afford." There's no harm in writing. So she writes a letter. Okay, and that's forgotten. We traveled from Washington to New York. We went to Florida first, then we went to New Jersey. And there the wedding all happened. And just after we returned to New Jersey, there's a phone call. And this man, Jimmy Neesmith, picks up the phone and says, "You will
Wow.
be my guest of honor for the festival. And
Wow.
I'll take care of all your expenses." Okay. And I said,
Fantastic.
I have another friend called Almelo, and he said, "Oh, it can be anyone, the dog, cat, anyone, you just bring them." So
He actually said that.
I know. So there I landed with Almelu at Tennessee, and I told a story to 45 storytellers and to 10,000 people.
So
And
these
while
these
this was
people have come
happening,
from different parts of the world.
world exactly,
Oh.
and they had been having the festival for the past 20 years. So
Okay.
I was like thrilled. And then this is like the magic wand. No, what do you want? And then I said, listen, I want to start an academy for storytelling, and people will not recognize it in India if I don't have an affiliation from a university in the US. And he
Okay.
said, oh, that's pretty easy. It's done. He said, just go home.
Wow.
And he said, have you had a festival like this? I said, no. I'll also fund you for the first international festival. And
Wow.
so
That was
this,
like a
I
takeoff.
know, real takeoff. And I returned, and there I got the affiliation. And well,
So the festival was organized in 2005, right? I
five,
mean,
yes.
okay.
So
That
he
was
sent the
soon
fund
after your
later.
trip
Yeah.
back from the US. Okay.
And the second instant was,
So when you say, just one question that I have here is,
yeah,
when you say affiliated to a university, so right now
yeah.
the International Academy for Storytelling in Bengaluru is affiliated to which of these universities and in how many places?
So the beginners course,
Hmm.
the first course that so I had two courses. Of course, I took a letter from him for affiliation for any course because I think that was little wise. I thought, let me put in any. Suppose I develop a university also there here,
Yeah.
it should be
Yeah.
there. So he actually gave me a letter saying for anything which is in the a field of training for any of your courses, you can use my affiliation. So that was a
Wow.
certification he
So this
sent.
was the
And
University of Tennessee or something.
yeah, University of Tennessee. That's
Okay.
right. So
Okay.
East Tennessee. That's what they
East
call it.
Tennessee. Right.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
So this was his actually the International Storytelling Center is the affiliation that we
Wow. Wow.
got. Yeah.
That, a
And
country of the size of India, I mean, you have one International Academy of Storytelling itself speaks volumes about
yeah.
how we see stories today in education. We will come to that, but I'm just kind of flagging that point because
Yes.
I'm agitated when I hear this anyway. Yeah.
Right. And the second I want to just mention is the Ministry of Culture from Sweden. They
Okay.
decided because the trade and commerce people in Sweden, they decided to have a contract with Karnataka for
Okay.
Volvo.
Okay.
Okay, so now when these ministries are all in one building in Yothenborough,
Right.
I had
Right.
the privilege of visiting the Parliament House also there.
Right.
It's a beautiful place near a lovely lake, and
Hmm.
it was such an open. You could just discuss it with the ministers. I don't know which uh, Janma we are going to have that here at all because I don't think we anyone recognizes
No, but
anything. We don't
Geeta,
even know who's the minister. Yeah.
don't
So,
forget, we keep
anyways, it was
hearing
such an
stories every
open.
day.
So, this Ministry of Culture
Yeah.
decided when the Ministry of Commerce and Trade is having a tie up with Volvo, why not we have something with culture? Okay,
Okay.
so they decided on bringing Srishti School of Art and Design for their designing, and one person from there, and then Prakash Belwadi for documentation films,
Okay.
and
Right.
Jayachandar for fusion dance, contemporary dance, and then this lady who was the top minister, her name is Yulva, and she says, "No, I need a storyteller." This is what she
Ah,
said. We need to bring storytelling into Sweden, and I wanted to be part of the Ministry of Culture. So
wow.
she
Okay.
then nobody knows where to find because first time storytelling. So the thing is, the first program officer who was with me in IFA. Remember, I
Mhm.
was telling her she had married a person who was the ambassador actually between India and Sweden, and his name was
Okay.
Zach. And
Okay.
so they contacted Zach. Zach said, "My wife knows very well, and you go to Katal." So she found. She always says, "I found Katalia. I found you." And the whole ministry came down. There were 8 people. They just
Okay.
landed up in Katalia office, and they said, "Give
Wow.
us a demonstration of how you would bring storytelling to Sweden. What
Right.
are what are the?" And I just gave them a beautiful PowerPoint. First time I'd learned how to make a
So by then you
PowerPoint.
had mastered all these funding
Exactly.
calculations and
Yes.
all of that.
Absolutely. And then she says, "Yes, you're on." And she said, "For 6 years, we'll have a contract." So it was a contract, an MOU between
Wow.
Karnataka and Sweden to take storytelling to Sweden.
Wow.
So
Okay.
this is how
Wonderful. So we have some comments in between. I'm just going to read out.
Yeah,
So we have friends saying that this is a superb session, wonderful session, interesting conversations. Interesting conversation, says Shikha. Thanks, Giri and Geeta, for organizing this for all of us. Wonderful. So
lovely.
it's people who tune in, who are our source of. I mean, they are the soul of the conversation in any case. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, Geeta, I think there are several things that come out in this in this story. One is, I think, I mean, I cannot find any word other than audacity. I think you're an audacious woman. Okay,
Thank you.
somebody who dreamt big and who had the audacity to think that I could establish an organization which is a global level organization that would just tell stories, right? Stories to
Absolutely.
adults and children, quite unthinkable in those days.
Right.
And I think it also holds a very important lesson for all of us who work in education, who work in this so called social development space, that, if there are accidents sometimes which happen, like you are talking about, but some of these accidents are good, right?
Yeah,
They just lead you on to bigger things, and one must just keep
absolutely.
persisting. Yeah.
True.
Okay. So, Geeta, in the interest of time, let me just move forward. I now want all of us to hear a story from you. But before that, let me talk a little about this wonderful book, Tales from the World. So this is beautifully illustrated by Arkapriya Kohli. It's published by, I mean, you can see these lovely illustrations here. Published by Penguin Puffin. It all happened in 2022. So in this book, Geeta actually puts together tales from as many as 12 countries. And if I remember, they range from Sweden to Ghana to China to India to Korea to South Africa to the US, and, blah, blah, blah. And I just want to read from the introduction of that book, and Geeta will tell us a little more about the book. So let me read this. And the introduction is very, very, it's something that puts you into a great deal of thought. Um, Dinesh Kumar Tiwari has a question up. Why don't you ask a question here? I'll take it up. Meanwhile, I will just read from this book. Who am I? Someone asks. I'm the story of myself. I'm a storyteller. Who is a storyteller? And then this person says, a wanderer by heart who travels, cares, collects, shares, and tells stories to spread peace, harmony, love, and friendship wherever she sets foot. And I think that describes you. I mean, you are that person who's been doing it
Absolutely.
so beautifully all these years. So tell us, Geeta, a little more about this book. How did it happen? When did you start working on it? And what is the most exciting part of this book?
Mm, actually, I started writing. I write a diary every day,
Every day.
because every day, yeah.
Mhm.
And it's not only expenses and income, but I also think it's a lovely thing to remember and
Mhm.
recall, because I think my mother had, again, my grandmother, my mother had this habit. So from the time I remember, I've been writing a diary.
Okay.
One of the things I jot down is also the places, since I also go to a lot of places and they have strange names. For instance, I recently came back from Cochin from the course, and
Okay.
I was the museum. I did it in Kerala Museum,
Mhm.
and the place where the course happened is called Pattadi Palam. Now, that's not an
Study
easy name.
Palam. Okay.
Pattadipalam, okay.
Mhm.
And then the main place is situated in Edappalli. So these
Edappalli.
are Edappalli. So you have to pass through Shenganur and so many things. So yeah, so you don't
Correct.
remember such names unless you write it down. So
Correct.
sometimes when I have to recall where did this thing, I'll go back to my diary and just tell.
Right.
So the same way, places like Ljungby, for instance, in
Okay.
Sweden, it's
Okay.
Ljungby, but it's pronounced as Ljungby. Okay, and Gothenberg is Gothenburg according, but they tell it as Gothenburg. Okay,
My God. Okay.
yeah. So
Crazy.
I also write that down so
Mm.
that helped me a lot because every day writing down, jotting down where I've gone and what are these places, everything. And everyone after I would always share something from my recent visit in all the courses. So I've like now both diploma and beginners, I've almost finished 182 batches. So I'm
Wow.
just so in each batch you can imagine I've just returned from say Japan, and I would tell something about Japan and about
Japan.
the place and everything. So it helped me with that, and I always like to relate to whatever is immediately happening or
Right.
happened with me. So everyone started saying, "Ma'am, why don't you write a diary? Okay, why
Okay.
don't you, write a book
Mm-hmm.
about all your travels?" So I
Mm-hmm.
started writing. I began to write about my
Mm-hmm.
travels and start putting two and two together, three and five together, all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things. And then I didn't know because everyone said you need a book agent, but then I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know how to get one, and they were expensive, where to
Mm.
approach. And then some of them said, oh, they won't take a personal book, all that. So one day I just decided, why don't I get in touch directly with a person in Penguin? Okay,
Okay.
so I just wrote to the Penguin saying, I have this book. I want to
Mm-hmm.
bring out a storyteller's journey with parallel, real and real stories. That's what I
Mm.
told her. So
Mm.
one real story, and so this is what I wrote to her. And she passed it on to a person called Sohini, who's in charge of the children's sections.
Okay.
And and then I got commission. I mean,
Wow.
they said send us three chapters, and so it finally became something for children. Now I said, okay, that is for children, but I do want to put something, a little bit of where that story came from. And they said, okay, we'll do that. And so there was a lot of discussion, and that's how, if you see in this book, there is a little bit about where I found the story or how I
Yeah.
came in
That you have
touch with
mentioned
it.
in the beginning
Yeah,
and
and a
so.
little fact file which
Yeah.
follows the story.
Did
Of
you
course,
know? Yes.
all the stories were not taken that I traveled and wrote, because between the three sub editors, I think they chose what appealed to all three of them, and that's how
Correct.
I think the stories
So
happened.
probably some of the ones that are your most favorite stories, they may not have appeared here. Is that
They
right?
may not have appeared.
Okay.
Yeah.
But one of the things that fascinated me with this book is, and I was reading a few stories yesterday. Um so there's this first story on the wings of a storyteller bird, and this is a tale from India, right? It's a fascinating story where a bird and a mountain become friends, and all of that. Uh, Somewhere as I read through some of these stories, the sense that I got was that you have added much more to it, right? You may have
Yeah.
picked up a story from a particular person, like a very old storyteller in Africa, to maybe the bylanes of India, but then you have added your own masala to it, right?
True.
I mean, that's what makes
You
a
just
great
know
story.
my mind.
Yes, that's what makes a great story. What is that process of adding your masala to an existing story, and how do you know where to do it? Because if it's added at the wrong place and in the wrong quantity, that entire dish is going to be bad. So
Correct, correct.
maybe some clue as to how that works.
Okay. One of the discoveries or learning for me when I was doing the training for people uh, is everyone loved when I told a story which they could visualize.
Hmm.
So, what I felt also was, I think a story does not appeal to a listener unless the listener can see the story.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
so you're not seeing me, but you're actually seeing the story unfold before you,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
why I don't use not to I don't use pictures, especially in my beginners course. I don't use props or anything. I just tell a story. Okay,
Right. Right.
And when I tell that story and when they can see that story, most of them can see that story when it is appealing to them. That is, the psychology of a person is the identification of that character.
Right. Right.
Okay, the identification. So I might have a metaphor for our own personalities in the story, but what they identify is the emotions and the
Right.
feelings.
Right.
So two things that I, the masala that I bring in is mainly in the emotional side,
Right.
and mainly if you see all the stories and tales from the world has nature in it. The
Mm.
moon, the sun, the planets, and the
Mm.
wind, and I feel because we are earthy ourselves, we can
Mm.
relate to it very well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Mm.
so I think that is the two areas that I
Okay.
always try to merge, even if
Right.
it's a very flat story, which
Yeah.
we can do, which is what I've done with the very first story.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Of
Yeah,
course.
so
This
so
is
I can
interesting.
get.
I think, I mean, only, of course, only you will know what is happening inside of you as you write it. But then we are lucky because we get something that we really love reading. And I think it's to those who are watching this show, I'm not marketing Tales from the World. That's not the idea. But then do pick up this wonderful book, and I can promise you it's going to delight, entertain, and move you emotionally as well. So it's a wonderful book. So Geeta, we have a little time now to listen to a story
Yes.
from you. Okay, a few
Okay.
minutes of your storytelling, and I think I want people to see how you tell stories, and then we have a little more of the sobering discussions around storytelling in education and so on. So all yours.
Okay. Okay. So
There's one question which you can probably take up,
yeah.
two questions, in fact, which you can take up anytime later. One is a question from Dinesh Tiwari, who's asking, are you offering any free storytelling online courses for new storytellers like me? And then there is an observation from Hamara Parivar, which is, nowadays amongst new generation mothers, the storytelling passion to their babies is gradually disappearing, even impacting the rural sectors. Do you have any thoughts on that? And yeah, I mean, the others are observation, but these are the two that might probably reflect, need your reflection a little. You can take it up later. Yeah,
Yeah, I'll just remind me and I'll do that.
I will do that. I will remind you again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're all lost in life at one juncture or the other. And that's what happened to me when I was shifting from being a school teacher, a librarian, and I was called to a place to suddenly train teachers. And I thought, if I'm going to train teachers in the art of storytelling, then first of all, I need to have a story,
Yeah.
right? So, and what kind of story am I going to first talk about or tell for this kind of audience, which is the first storytelling session is for an adult audience. So, how am I going to tell this story? And I was lost. And as I was lost, I go to this mountain where I go very often, which is called Arunachala. And there is a person, there's always a catalyst. And this man who's now a librarian for the past 40 years there, he
Wow.
says, Geeta, why don't you just take a walk around the mountain? And, it'll take about 3, 4 hours, but I want you to take the forest path, he says. So I
Okay.
start walking this path,
Hmm.
and my mind is filled, and
Hmm.
I'm watching, and I see the mountain suddenly arresting my thought because it
Hmm.
has different contours, and it has different kind of silhouettes and suddenly there's the sun which is slowly rising, and it's
Hmm.
beautiful as it reflects on the mountain, because this was very early in the morning. And
Hmm.
I thought I saw a shadow. I saw some birds and I saw a shadow. And then halfway, I just sat on a culvert and I looked at this mountain, completely no blank thought. And
Hmm.
that's when I thought, there's something that this bird, the shadow of a bird, kind of trying to tell this mountain. And I got the story. And that's
Definitely.
the first part. That's
But,
all that I got. I was excited. I was so happy. And I know about Ramana Maharishi because when he came to this mountain, it was bare and naked. And when he
okay,
actually started meditating, and I think people started planting seeds, and this mountain became green. And I said,
green.
that will be the end of my story. So I knew the beginning and the end, but I
Wow.
was saying, what else can I add, as you were asking me, that particular masala that I can bring into that story? And
Yeah.
that's when I started with that in the beginning there was nothing, infinity for stretches and stretches and nothing. And there was this atom which was lost in space because I identified myself. But the atom had no emotions, it's just lost. It's not
Yeah.
afraid, but it's lost. It's seeking another person like itself. It's going around and where am I? What am I? What am I going to do here? And as the atom is looking, it sees another one. Maybe someone like another atom. Is it a proton? Is it a neutron? We don't know because it's still lost. And then sees a little cloud and some light, and they all coming together with a woo, woo, woo. That's how the evolution of first sound started. And then all of them coming together, and there was this explosion. Now, that might have been the Big Bang, it might have been a silent explosion, but whoo, and out of that chaos, there was elements, there were planets, there were light and everything, but one light that just came out and stood and silent, not saying I am light, not saying I exist, but just very silently positioning, just being there. And all the time, from then till now, we see the sun never proclaiming anything, right? Just silently pulling everything, and without the sun, nothing exists. And so, our atom, this atom, which is me, also getting caught in all these commotions, right? And then comes the powerful one emerge first. So, there comes first the Saturn. And Saturn is very egoistic because of first, now emotions, the ego has taken space, okay? And Saturn is coming out and says, I don't want to face the sun. I don't want to face the sun. I can find my own orbit. The sun is having a nice smile because he knows that the Saturn cannot be by himself. The Saturn has no choice but to go towards the sun and then starts orbiting. And then Jupiter is always busy with his wives and he's dancing and he's so lost with all his wives. He's a jolly fellow and he just comes out and he doesn't even know he's got into his orbit because his wives are always there to support him. And so I say that all these planets come out, and then the sun, he's just enjoying his position in the sky. Oh, I can do something absolutely without proclaiming anything. No word, just to pull the gravitational pull. And then,
Amazing.
first
Amazing.
time, he hears a voice and says, can I be close to you? Please, I love you. I'm so fascinated by you. And the sun, who's this? I'm Venus and the planet of love, and I just know what I want. I just want to be close to you for all your lifetime. And the sun says, there you are, granted, and just pulls her closer to him. And that's how Venus has always been close to the sun. So, I
Wonderful.
just bring
Wonderful. I
all this.
think I see. Uh, uh, I mean, you've taken off from that Meru story in the book, which is, of
Yes,
course, the dialogue between the bird and the mountain, and you've
yeah,
taken off somewhere else. But then, the fascinating thing is how deep are the meanings that are embedded in what you've said. You can draw analogies between the atom to an individual. And, it
yes,
also brings me to this great power of storytelling, which can help us understand ourselves, look deep
Absolutely.
within, and experience. I somewhere feel that what we do in education is so emotionless now. It just doesn't draw upon the human emotion any longer, right?
Right.
And so that takes us. Thank you so much for that. I wish we could have kept on listening,
No, I know. It's a
more and more.
long story.
I'm sure you would have gone for hours together. But then let's get to some. I mean, you've traveled across the world. You've seen probably thousands upon thousands of schools, and met as many teachers and educators across the world. Uh, where do you see storytelling being placed in the scheme of education? Is it something, whatever you've seen in these 50 odd countries that you've been to, does it give you hope that a culture that is as old as the hills? I think human
Right.
beings started telling stories the moment they started speaking. It is as old as that. Um, and much of what we are today is because of that storytelling tradition. A lot of it was very oral, so it had to be stories, right? Uh, the printing, the letter is just a few thousand years old.
True. Very
Everything
true.
else was in the
The
sound at that
oral
point.
tradition. Yes.
Where do you see this appearing? I mean, what is your sense of what's happening to storytelling within school education?
I've been striving for the last 25 years. Um, and that I think also would answer Dinesh's question. Uh, because storytelling is क्या है ये क्या
Yeah.
है The teachers tell stories. I can tell a story. I've seen principals telling me that.
Okay.
Okay. Uh,
Why
you
do we
all
need
tell
you?
stories. Why
Yeah.
do we need you? And why do we need to pay?
Oh, yeah. Right.
See? So, and then it is not maths. You're not
Yeah.
going to write an IIT entrance exam for
Correct.
storytelling, right? Because my child is going to be an engineer or a doctor or a scientist it's already all sealed. Parents already know what their children have to become.
Yes.
And I don't want my child to become a storyteller. Huh?
I can imagine what they threw at you.
Oh my God. And the only thing saving grace was what my father said, just ask what next and respond and don't react. And I always, this very sad. I mean, I had to find. I used to just imagine that other person barking at me and say, "So sad, it's your loss.
Yeah.
It's your loss, right?" That's the
Absolutely.
best way I could deal with it,
Yeah.
without giving up my sense of. In fact, I know one very popular school which has a chain of school, and the man says, what are you saying? Why are you doing the storytelling and all? Come join my school. I'll send you to Australia. I'll get 3 times more salary than what you're getting. How much
Wow.
would you be getting in this storytelling? This is how a principal of a very popular school talked to me one day.
The private school. Yes.
Yeah, so much for private
No,
schools
but
and government schools are
Geeta,
nonetheless.
if I
The
can, if I can,
BEOs and the CEOs, I wanted to tell Dinesh
hmm,
that you are ready to pay for a Baskin Robbins एक आइसक्रीम के लिए एक स्कूप के लिए 200 रुपया देंगे आप हाँ and if you want to buy for the whole family it becomes 1,000 correct 5 members of a family 1,000 rupees you know how much people hesitate to give you 1,000 rupees for an hour session of storytelling so
yeah,
why should we do free? What is the worth? Why don't you value it as much as you value? There are people who have who have saved up money. There was a lady from Egypt. She saved up money for 2 years to come and do my course. But she can do that because she believed in this. You do that when you want to do a graduation course, isn't it?
right, right.
So,
Yeah,
so this is what I've been striving for, saying, why don't you take it as a serious thing? Why are
yeah,
you still taking it so frivolously? Okay?
right,
And
right.
then there are these storytellers also who will do free. तो वो तो फ्री सेशन दे रहा है आप क्यों 5,000 10,000 चार्ज कर रहे हो
Hmm. Hmm.
because I
Yeah.
want to be popular. The problem with storytelling also is that everyone, it's got two things. One is money, one is fame. Most of them want fame because you're a performance storyteller, like you perform, right? And then
Yeah. You
everyone,
need that visibility. Yeah.
so everyone, most of them do this for visibility, not because they really want the worth of storytelling, like
Right.
as especially in education.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I were to take that one point that you're making, we are still very, and if I restrict that conversation to India, you're saying that we are still very far away from recognizing the
Yes.
place of storytelling within the scheme of our school education, right? I mean, that's what you're
Absolutely.
saying.
Absolutely.
It just appears as an add-on. Acha, theek hai.
Yeah. Yeah.
Story bata
It's
denge,
like craft, art, needlework. I mean, suppose
Right,
I
right.
want to,
Right.
so that it's
Some
just
useful period wasted, SUPW type of a thing. Okay.
exactly
But what is the scene from in other
abroad.
countries abroad? I mean, and what are some of those lessons that we can learn?
That is one reason why somewhere I believe, and I thank those people who gave me the affiliations, because when they say something they mean it. That is one thing we haven't learned from them. And they're very loyal. I mean,
Yeah.
if they call you for a festival and they have a contract with you, they will not compromise and call some. Our people, they just jump, cross, grab,
Yeah.
okay? Not
Yeah.
study about it. Those people, they do a research on you. They know that you have a background. They know that you have, and that is when they say, okay, Geeta, we know this you've done. Will you help us to do a
Yeah.
cultural curriculum for Scotland? You know, that's
Wow.
how I went to
Okay.
Scotland.
Okay.
So
Okay.
to make the curriculum for their cultural studies, and they respect you, whether they are going to implement or not. At least they respect. There's a reverence for you. They don't
Right.
throw it like they don't shove it off.
Yeah.
This is something we have to learn from them.
Right.
Or the Ministry of Culture from Sweden. Why would they believe that storytelling is an important part of their schools? And to be thing, they are the highest paid. The teachers in Sweden are
Okay.
highest paid,
Sweden, Finland, I
and
guess.
and for every school they have a library, they have a museum within the 5 kilometers radius. It will belong to that school, and
Mm,
their health, there will be a hospital. So they told me storytelling is as important. You will come and train our pre-service and in-service teachers every year,
mm,
so they
mm.
are able to take it to their university level. And I haven't been called even once by the university here to say, come and train our teachers or come and train our people in the university for,
Mm.
except Azim Premji. So that
Right.
was one breakthrough that was
That's an
beautiful.
exception
It was
again. That's an exception.
exceptional because
Yeah.
I really thank them so much, because more than 4 or 5 times they called me to do a course for their MA education students with credit points.
Amazing. 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 Yeah.
How many do that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So only an upcoming school, sometimes they'd say, oh, we are an upcoming school. We have about 7 teachers. Will you come and train them in storytelling?
Mm. I
And
think
so
there
I
is
lost that faith.
there's a
I
deeper
somehow
process.
lost it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I
To be
think that
very honest. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I can understand. I can understand that very deep sense of frustration. But
Yeah.
I also think that one of the worrying things is that in the schooling system we tend to measure things that um, that are very narrow in the
Measurable. Yeah.
measurable, right? Quantifiable, measurable.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
Storytelling doesn't fit into that framework, right? But then, as I think Albert Einstein said many, many years ago, some of the things that you cannot measure are the most that count. And I think unless and until we begin to see this as educators, as people working in education, two areas, 2 or 3 areas which I feel are languishing at the bottom of the heap is one is sports and physical education, right from
Right.
the earliest days. The other is the integration of the arts and crafts, and of course, prominently amongst them, storytelling itself. It's something that comes so naturally to all of us, but we are yet unable to see it, and that's a big cause of worry for me.
I
Uh,
think now the NEP, the latest says integration of arts in the curriculum. But you
yeah,
know what? integration of arts in the curriculum, all written.
Yeah, yeah.
See, so it's again they're asking you to quantify everything.
They're using the prism of what already exists to.
Yeah, yeah,
But many years ago, Geeta, when I was in school in Baldwin Boys in Bangalore, we had uh, these moral science classes, and
I
very
know.
interestingly, it was called as moral science, as if it was a science, right? And then they would come, there would be some boring story that they said, and you had to mug up the lesson from that story. What is the
Right.
moral of this story? And
The
that had to be
story.
written in the exam. But at least, by doing that, somewhere, even if it was mechanical, there was space for some storytelling. But
Yeah,
the more recent example, and I haven't seen it myself work, personally, I haven't been there, is this happiness curriculum in Delhi schools, right?
I know.
The happiness curriculum, of course, it is all informed by the Dalai Lama and his kind of thinking and so on. But then there's at least a state government that keeps happiness as an objective for education, and I think this
Right,
is something that very few of us have even explored. I mean, I was
right.
reading a wonderful book. Probably I'll review it on my channel the some other time. It's called Happiness in Education by this
Hmm.
wonderful educationist called Nell Noddings. She's based in the
Okay.
US. It's one very nice book in terms of why happiness should be an aim of education. I think we've forgotten that. Um, so we can have more of these conversations, perhaps call you back another time to explore this theme a little
Sure.
more. But then the last question to you for the day from my side is uh, yeah, and this question that was asked by Hamara Parivar, let me put that before I go ahead. He says that the storytelling passion amongst new generation mothers, young mothers, is what he probably means, is fast disappearing even in rural areas. So, what do you have to say about that? What's your take? Do you agree with him? Do you have anything to say there?
And the
Yes.
urban front, I think there are a lot of young mothers who are mostly the people who join my
Hmm.
courses. So
Hmm.
it's the mothers. I think there is a slow turn of events. I think
Hmm.
more urban mothers are taking up storytelling,
Hmm.
and the rural people maybe survival, migrating to cities, no
Hmm.
time, are
Hmm.
losing out because again they are also influenced by the urban society, and they
Hmm.
are, I think, losing the joint family systems, though no grandmothers, again nuclear society, and that's one of the reasons why
Hmm. Hmm.
we lost storytelling, because
Hmm.
no more of the tradition that was continued by the older generation
Hmm.
was there. So it may be true that in the rural areas it is slowly losing its grip, but in
Hmm.
the urban areas, I feel a lot of things are now
In fact,
picking up,
the
and
day
I'm
before
sure we'll go
yesterday,
back not to the
mm,
bullock cart days. We don't
yeah,
have to go back to that, but I think slowly we're also going back in time. It's a circular time, right? So how long will we go on,
yeah,
jogging in the same place faster and faster? One day, like the bubble has to burst, right?
yeah,
People
yeah.
will just be
I
fed
can
up of
already
everything.
see another story coming out of this from you.
Ah,
Okay, so
that's right.
the last question. I mean, some friends have
Yeah,
joined in. Some of them asking. I hope this is recorded. Of course, the it automatically gets recorded, and the
yeah.
same link that you have used to enter this conversation, you can enter it again to watch the recording. So that's great. So the last question. I know it sometimes sounds banal. It's a bit mundane, but then, what are your ideas on fixing things? How do you I mean, you're a visionary. You started off, and that's another term that I forgot to mention when I started talking about you. It's only, because you've had that vision that you've come so far, and you're crying now over the rooftops, and people are beginning to hear you, right? And many of us are beginning to, make that noise. So one has to continue with that hope. But then, given the huge challenges that our schooling system faces in India, uh, and particularly with reference to schools which we call as government schools, how do we fix things? What are your ideas? What are the recipes that you want to offer? Let's say
So
20,
one,
I mean, there's a very
yeah.
corporate question. 20 years later,
So one of the things I wanted to do is also set up like a university or a proper institution, saying a story land, or a story institution with different subjects, and each subject has the story element, how to make an entire curriculum right from
Hmm.
class 1 to class 12 through
Hmm.
stories for every subject, including calculus, analytical geometry,
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
So this is one thing I have, and so the second step would be a training based on that, where
Hmm.
both need to be there. Like academician has to be there and the storyteller, because they are two
Hmm.
different things, and
Hmm.
how we can merge. So all these ideas I
It
had
needs to
long
be
ago.
robust and rigorous as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but Giri, you the problem is the government has to open their eyes and see and recognize and help people like me who want to do this, right? And then by the time they really help you, I think you're 99, you're having Alzheimer's, and somebody has to walk you to the stage before they give you an award. Okay, so I don't want it at that
But
stage.
then by then you're beginning to tell other kinds of stories.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're seeing other types of stories. Okay, so that went off the thing. I wanted to make this to become an educational policy. I think slowly that is happening, which I'm
Right.
glad. And because of
Right.
the innumerable people that were trained by me, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, I was one of the pioneers, and I think 99% of people who are storytellers today who are doing very well are almost everyone trained by me. So they're going to carry, this is going to continue for I'm sure for the next at least 10 years, before, whatever.
So
So
I hope this little stream, which is now
there
becoming
are beautiful storytellers now. So if you
wonderful.
see, it's almost getting saturated, because every hour there is a storytelling festival, there's a story session, whether they're good or not is not a thing. At least that storytelling is happening. I remember when I first went to Narayan Murthy, for instance, in Infosys. There was,
Hmm.
in fact, I did go to Sudha Murthy. Sorry to say this, but I don't want to mention names. But she had the first Infosys office in opposite Gopal and all. That's where our office was. So I went to her and I said, I'm doing storytelling and I need a fund. And she said, we only help poorest of the poor, and we can help with books and setting up libraries. Because I don't
God.
think she really understood what storytelling was.
But she's
Very
an
strange.
incredible storyteller
I
herself.
know that this happened much later. So,
Yeah.
and then I went to one of the Infosys conferences, because again, Infosys was a new company. And I remember Narayan Murthy standing there and everyone crowding around him, and, giving cards. And I had this first card that I printed, called Storyteller. And I was feeling so bad to, go and say I'm a storyteller. Okay, because it's something not like big like all the others were
All
doing,
the
is what I
impact.
felt.
Yeah.
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 So I just went to him and I just told him. He said, "So who are you?" I said, I'm Geeta Ramanujam, and I'm just a storyteller," I said. And he said, "Don't say that. Say I am a storyteller. It's a great thing that you're doing." So I
Lovely.
won't forget that at all.
Yeah.
I think for
Sense of
me to
identity and
also, yeah, because you need
self-esteem.
someone to motivate you, right? To
Yes.
say that. So that's how storytelling was then.
Right.
This was way back again, 1998. But now, of course, you don't have to explain. Everyone knows what storytelling is. I think they are
Right.
using it all over the place, which is in a way
Yeah, I
very
think
good.
it's also particularly in the urban and probably semi-urban areas, or even in the rural areas. There's so much content that is now available digitally. Of course, that demands a separate conversation by itself.
Yeah, right.
We have moved into a very visual culture now,
Yeah. And I
and
think
I
all over the world now, the storytelling has become a big thing. All
right,
over the world. Yeah.
right, right,
Wherever you go now, it's all storytelling. So
right. Wonderful.
it's again a phase.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a phase, and
So, yeah. So let's end this discussion
yeah.
on hope, but with a lot of hope and dreams.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think each one of us here who is logged into this conversation, who's listening to what Geeta says, and the several hundred or thousands of others who might, get to see what we have spoken today, I think it's upon all of us to, as they say in the corporate world, strategize. So we need to find ways of, getting under the skin of the people who take the decisions, to revive, this art which is probably still facing the danger of being completely wiped out, with this
Yes.
onward onslaught and march of, the measurable in education and the quantifiable, and so on and so forth. Most of the intangible things, which are of course the most critical for human existence, we are somewhere keeping them on the sides. So I'm really hoping that, this conversation motivates all of us. Thank you so much, Geeta, for joining in. And there are many
Thank
things I.
you. Yeah, it was wonderful. I think it's nice that, we could discuss our thoughts aloud. I think that's what matters in conversations, right? I enjoyed this conversation because I know you asked me just the right questions, and I was fearless in answering most of them, because I don't think I need to fear anyone anymore. So
Correct.
uh,
Did
this was
that.
a very open, like an open mic, and I hope that people who are listening to it also have taken a little bit of what we both were feeling, because since both of us have understood the education line, we've been in that. I think it was wonderful to converse. I mean, thank you so much for this lovely opportunity.
You're such an inspiration, Geeta. Continue. I'm more strength to you. And I think I would want to end with a statement that has just popped up in my, uh, on my screen, which is from Ruhi Sharif. Maybe you know her. And she
Yeah.
says, Geeta is a wonderful person and a pure soul with a gift for storytelling. I think that's
Wow.
very
It's such
rich.
an honor.
Uh,
Thank you.
and in
Yeah.
fact,
Thank you, Ruhi. Yeah.
regarding the question that was asked about the disappearing art of storytelling
Oh.
among young mothers, uh, there's another thought that says that young mothers get too many inputs and hence lack imagination. The main ingredient for
Mm.
making up instant stories. I think that's a very,
Wonderful.
very
Wonderful.
insightful statement that perhaps in a visual culture we stop
Right.
imagining. And there
Yes.
is
Very
Google
true.
Baba, and I think that's
I
a
know.
big
That's
killer
the
for education.
culprit.
Because
Yeah.
everything I think children today
Can be
believe is
seen.
Google.
Uh,
Google, I'll go and Google it, and the answer is there.
true,
So
true, true.
where are we imagining, thinking, and so on?
I,
But we
I,
live in very interesting times, and I think there are very interesting challenges, for all of us who want to create a better world for children through education and through storytelling. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining in,
yes.
and look forward to more interesting conversations on Giriz Adda. Thank you. Bye
Hey,
bye.
Giri,
Yeah.
I think one last thing. I
Hmm.
haven't heard you a little song or just two lines
Oh.
from you before we end, please.
Okay, but that song has to obviously relate to what we are
The
discussing over
story.
here. And you made my job easier because this is a song that I used to sing in the Valley School. Remember, it had become some sort of a
Yeah.
school anthem. The kids had kind of, children had latched onto it. And it is a song that talks about a story. It is a story based song, and it goes like this. It's from the film Dur Gagan Ki Chhao Mein. Which was directed and produced by Kishore, and he sang all the songs. And Kishore, of course, is a big favorite of mine. And I'll sing a couple of lines. चल के तुझे मैं लेके चलूं एक ऐसे गगन के तले जहां गम भी न हो आंसू भी न हो बस प्यार ही प्यार पले एक ऐसे गगन के तले. So I think this is for me. It remains the lodestone for me in the work in the work that I do, and I'm sure it's something that can inspire us to, this promise to, to keep this promise of taking all our children to that land where blah 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 everything that we
Love.
want to
Lot
see,
of love.
care, fun, everything
Yeah.
happens. So yeah, so let's keep working towards
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. You've been such a big
Yes.
encouragement, all of you. Yeah. Bye bye. I'm ending the broadcast.